climate meeting. My name is Ingrid Van Eckert. I am the VP Operations. Basically, I work for Cara, okay? Cara apologizes. She, our president, Cara Robin, would have loved to be here and welcome Julia and welcome all of you for our first in-person meeting of the year. Unfortunately, a small minor thing called emergency appendectomy came in the way, and she is literally still recovering. And, you know, sends her warmest regards to us. Another thing, please don't leave after the meeting. What we're trying to do is have you write some postcards to voters into Nevada, Arizona, and into some of the congressional districts here that have a very good chance of winning, such as CA 27, which is up Lancaster, Santa Clarita area, and down into the 22, which is Rudy Salas in Central Valley. Great chance, and I think we also have something for the David Min district, which is I mentioned that. Yeah. Whitesides.
He's my neighbor, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My congressional nickname.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, he's a phenomenal candidate, and so is David Min. We will be seeing a video because he couldn't be here in person. He is taking over the seat that Katie Porter has vacated. And in regards to the postcards and addresses, etc., I want to thank Jane Rashan, who is our Let's Action chair. No, political chair. I forgot.
Close enough. At large.
At large. Anyway, she does everything you ask her to do. She's amazing. And I want to thank Beth Lewis, our membership chair, and now, who took care of all of you guys signing in. Again, thank you so much for coming. This is, I hope you like the wonderful room we're in and the wonderful church, and I hope parking wasn't too horrible. And now, I want to introduce Mark Salzberg. He is our chair of the Clean Energy and Environment Committee, and he will get this whole thing started. And thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the food.
So I don't know if this microphone is working.
Make sure it's on.
Okay. So I'm, as Ingrid said, I'm chair of the Environment and Clean Energy Committee of the West LA Democratic Club. We've been talking about clean energy, climate change, environmental issues for the last, almost a year now. One of the things that is hugely consequential whenever you're talking about climate change is the Inflation Reduction Act. And you're all scratching your heads saying, what does inflation have to do with clean energy and the environment? And the right answer is, it's a good name for a bill. So there are some elements of the Inflation Reduction Act that actually go directly to inflation, and Julia already mentioned that. And so we'll talk about those, Julia will talk about those in a little bit. But the bulk of the act is taken up with clean energy, with producing clean energy, with transmitting clean energy, and making sure that our power production and supply system operates with
I've got it cranked all the way up.
Output, CO2 as possible. So Julia's going to talk about that. She was right there at the beginning, and it's an exciting story. Politically, if you're a political junkie, it's a very interesting story as well. Julia is, boy, I met Julia back when she was president of the Santa Monica Malibu School District. It goes back to 2006. That also happened to be the year that she was elected to the state assembly. She was active in the state assembly for 6 years, moved on to Congress in 2012, boy, it's been a ride ever since. Julia has been recognized several times as one of the most outstanding Congress and effective congresspersons from California. I have lots more to say. I was given a terrific bio by Julia's staff. I have it on my phone here.
No.
But I'm not going to go there. So I want to bring up Julia without ado, our congressman. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good to see you too. Okay, all right, great. Well, it's wonderful to be here, Mark. Thank you for that very, very kind, warm introduction. I appreciate it very much. And Ingrid, where's Ingrid? Thank you. I've known Ingrid from the beginning of time, and really sorry that Kara can't be here too, because she was the one that really said, Julia, you got to come to Santa Monica. You got to come to the West LA Club. You got to do it. And it's been a long journey getting here, but I'm sorry that she can't be here.
She just gave an excuse.
Yeah. As Mark said, I was elected in 2012, and at the time, in 2012, I was the first woman to be elected in this congressional district, and I was the first Democrat in 70 years to be elected in the district that I represent. So it was a big milestone, and I know a lot of people from the West LA Santa Monica Club were really very, very much instrumental in my success in terms of getting there. And I am very, very grateful. And so in large part, I'm here to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and its history and so forth and so on, but I'm also here to say thank you very much for all of your help and support. I currently serve on the House Veteran Affairs Committee. I'm the ranking member on the subcommittee on health that oversees the largest healthcare system in the country to ensure our nation's veterans receive the health care that they have earned and deserved. I would be the head of the committee, except for the fact that Democrats aren't in charge today, but I will return there. I also serve on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And last Congress, I served on the Committee on Natural Resources and on the Select Committee for the Climate Crisis. And when the Republicans took over, they removed me from the Natural Resources Committee and abandoned the Committee on the Climate Crisis really altogether, which was a horrible move on their part. But to go back to 2019, so I'm going to tell a little bit of a story here, but going back to 2019, Nancy Pelosi, who was then Speaker, created the Climate Committee, and I was really, truly honored to be on this committee. A select committee just means it's not a permanent committee in Congress, like, Energy and Commerce, or the Veteran Affairs, or Transportation. Those are agriculture. They're all sort of standing committees. This was the select committee. And the Select Committee was formed with really one key mission, and that was to explore the whole of federal government with respect to the climate crisis, to take a look at the key pieces of legislation to see where it might be improved upon, and also to identify gaps in legislation that Congress needed to address in order to reach our nation's goal of net zero emissions by 2050. In my humble opinion, it was another very visionary move by Speaker Pelosi. A review of this scale had never been done before, and what came out of the committee ended up being the blueprint for the Biden administration's climate policy. And I will say parenthetically that I will tell you that happened because the committee staff on the select committee went over to the Biden administration and really formed Biden's environmental policy. But that's really how it all got sort of interconnected. But the work that we did on that committee was we completed a comprehensive report, and it was a framework that was truly groundbreaking. We went from transportation to the nation's power grid to agriculture to aviation, you name it. The report covered every pillar in our economy and what each pillar needed to do to meet our climate goals with the urgency that this existential threat demanded. And out of that report, I have specifically worked on legislation that was cited in the report that needed to be addressed, things like sustainable aviation fuel, investing in alternative proteins, whether they're plant-based or cultivated based, mandated zero-emission buses, and cleaner and greener federal buildings. These are all pieces of legislation that I am working on and carrying as we speak. So coming out of the COVID pandemic, Democrats really saw for the first time an opportunity to fund and legislate both what we called then physical and human infrastructure policy. The Biden administration called it the Build Back Better framework. And it was something that Speaker Pelosi was pushing very hard on and was very, very optimistic that we could get passed. There was a real need to boost the economy, to get people back to work, to support our children and get our children out of poverty, and to invest in our infrastructure, and to do all of this with the future and climate change in mind. And as time went on, the urgency of the pandemic faded in the minds of the public and some members of Congress and the Senate. And as inflation started to tick up, the human infrastructure piece, sadly, very sadly in my opinion, ended up taking less of a focus. But nonetheless, out of the Build Back Better came a number of bills, including the CHIPS and Science Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, more commonly known today as the Infrastructure Bill, and the Inflation Reduction Act that included a cohesive, massively ambitious, transformational, and bold climate agenda. The first big initiative of the Biden administration's agenda that gained most of the traction early on was the Infrastructure Bill. And a lot of people still think of the Infrastructure Bill as a traditional, straightforward bill that would repair roads and bridges and airports and so on. And it does all of that. But it is also the largest investment our nation's infrastructure has made in several decades. And it includes a whole lot more than roads and bridges, and we'll get into that. It was later coined the bipartisan infrastructure. Because a meager 13 House representatives and 19 Senate Republicans voted for it. It was enacted in 2021. And this transformational component of Biden's Invest in America agenda would eventually go hand in hand with the future Inflation Reduction Act. The bipartisan infrastructure bill represented a massive $1.2 trillion investment in infrastructure, including critical funding for public transit, EV charging infrastructure, and for the development and expansion of the electrical grid for not only increased use, but for better connectivity to expanding renewable energies. But as support for a larger package began to wane in Congress, and as inflation began to rise, support for the next bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, got a little trickier to pass. It became clear after the infrastructure bill that McConnell and the Republicans who supported the infrastructure bill were not going to support the next piece of legislation that would have included a lot of the human infrastructure that I was talking about, and additional pieces of the president's climate agenda. Again, despite our disappointment on the human infrastructure piece, it was ultimately put on the chopping block. We did get a huge infrastructure bill, though, that had a lot of climate-related policies, as I mentioned, the EV infrastructure, the grid, so forth and so on. A lot of public transit piece, which is important as well. So when it came to the next phase of Build Back Better, it was very clear that we could not rely on Republicans, so it was going to take every single Democrat in Congress, both in the House and in the Senate. So to regress for just a minute, back in 2019, when Trump was still president, I went on the UN Climate Change Conference. It was COP25. It was in Madrid with a delegation led by Nancy Pelosi, and we were the only representatives of the United States government there. We were the only representatives. There's not one single person from the Trump administration who attended this global conference. And we had dozens of press conferences there with reporters from all over the world wanting to know what had happened to U.S. leadership. And for every presser that we had one mantra and one mantra alone, and that was, we are still in, meaning we're still in the Paris Agreement. Remember, President Trump, one of his first actions was to throw the Paris Agreement out. But our mantra was, we're still in and we will not give in. Then the next COP meeting, which was 2 years later, because there was COVID in there, so 1 year got skipped, but was in Scotland, and the Biden administration was everywhere. We spent quality time with John Kerry, Biden's climate envoy, who, by the way, helped craft the 2015 Paris Agreement in the Obama administration. We also had 2 great meetings with Obama, and our pressers were quite different. In Scotland. We were filled with hope. We were in the middle of getting the infrastructure law passed. We were optimistic, fingers crossed, that we could also get additional substantial climate legislation passed as well. We knew the United States had to lead. We knew that it would be now or never, and we knew the world was never going to meet the climate goals needed to slow global warming if the United States wasn't leading the effort. But when we got back to the United States, the euphoria that we had there really started to turn into worry. Not only were the Republicans refusing to work with us, but Senators Manchin and Sinema were suggesting and hinting at very loudly on national television that they wouldn't be with us. Manchin wanted to address inflation, and he wanted us to scale back most of all of our ambitions. In reality, we knew that without Republican support, we would have to indeed scale back some of those ambitions, because the only way for us to get legislation done was to get it on the president's desk was without Republican support, was through this very DC policy wonk heavy process called the reconciliation process. The Senate is a strange place with lots of illogical rules to guide them. But in a nutshell, the budget reconciliation process allows for legislation to pass the Senate with a simple filibuster-proof majority and arcane rules that require everything to have an impact on the budget. Very little policy could make it through this process. By the way, I will tell you that we passed a lot of the ACA through reconciliation. The Republicans passed their $1 trillion corporate tax cut bill via reconciliation, and we were clearly going to have to pass the next piece of legislation via reconciliation. But to even get that through, we needed every single Democratic senator to be on board, and that included Joe Manchin, coming from a state that voted for Trump by 30 points, And Kirsten Sinema, who I don't know, was just a Democrat. Suddenly she wasn't anymore.
Right.
It was truly a roller coaster ride for many, many months, but ultimately the bill came together and represented the largest investment in combating the climate crisis in our nation's history and the largest investment that any other nation had ever made in the world to address global warming. Where the infrastructure law invested in climate infrastructure, especially EV charging and transmission, the IRA, with enormous tax credits, was in large part designed to create the demand for the electric infrastructure that the infrastructure law was going to build. The intention was that these two bills would work hand in hand seamlessly together. And if you throw in the CHIPS and Science bill that Congress passed, you started to see some very, very significant investments in combating climate change that no one in the world really thought could ever be done and capable of Congress to do. The IRA created a green bank, it extended solar tax credits, invested in electric vehicle incentives, home energy efficiency upgrades, advanced manufacturing, government procurement, climate-smart agriculture, coastal habitat protections, programs to address environmental justice, and it goes on and on. And if you look at how smart the politics are regarding the president's climate agenda, I think you'll be impressed. Let's just look at the manufacturing piece. Hyundai just announced that they're going to build a $10 billion plant in Georgia. Samsung and Texas Instruments are planning to invest $25 billion in chips manufacturing in Texas. Intel and others are spending over $100 billion in Arizona. And all of these bills included strong labor requirements, not only creating millions of good-paying jobs, but reaffirming Biden's well-earned title as the most pro-labor, pro-working family president in our country. So, you know, I think some of you might say, gosh, all of that money is going to red states. Well, it's not all going to red states, but it is, there's a lot of money going into red states, and guess what? Some of those Republicans that didn't vote for the bill are all out there, you know, patting themselves on the back and cutting ribbons. But hopefully, over time, minds will begin to change in red states when they see what is really happening in the transformation that is happening. And they will begin to believe in a clean energy future and what it will really mean to their pocketbooks. So some of you might remember that back in 2010 there was the Waxman-Markey bill that was a policy bill in the Obama administration to stand up a cap and trade system nationally across the country. Since we found ourselves here in this reconciliation process, and quite frankly, I mean, we know that the Waxman-Markey bill didn't pass in Congress, and actually we lost a lot of Democratic members after 2010 because they cast their vote. But because of the reconciliation bill, we really couldn't do a lot of policy within that bill. But the bill was really more about incentives, good incentives that we could do through tax policies. So I would say that, you know, compared to the Waxman-Markey bill, that the IRA is much more of a carrot versus a stick approach bill. But I think a bill that is working and will continue to work. I don't think we've seen all of the ramifications of which this bill will deliver. So we couldn't do the infrastructure piece we wanted to do, but part of that infrastructure piece, which is part of now the Inflation Reduction Bill, is allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. We put a cap on insulin costs, and we extended for 3 years ACA subsidies so that that healthcare was cheaper for people who really didn't have access to healthcare. And all those things have been good, and And I think just this piece of legislation alone, particularly around the insulin piece, that it is already impacting and changing and helping American families really across our country. So, you know, have we done enough to stop global warming? Absolutely not. There's still a lot of policy we need to get done, and that we couldn't get done because of the limitations of this reconciliation process. But these laws are part of a big, smart package of policies that will make a significant difference in addressing the climate crisis, will spur new industries, will bring together new coalitions, and put the United States back into the driver's seat again. And the one piece that we have to emphasize here that is just so frustrating is that I don't think the American people have any idea really what has been accomplished through some major bills, infrastructure, the CHIPS Act, and certainly the IRA. And by the way, the IRA was called the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, a bill that really addresses the climate crisis, as Mark said. But it was called that because guess what? That's what Joe Manchin wanted to call the bill. So, Joe, you want that? We'll call it that, but we need your vote. Anyway, that's kind of how it all really happened. And I think, you know, President Biden, this would have never happened, I think, without President Biden's smarts and intelligence, having been in Congress for so long and really having the acumen around policy and how Congress works and all of his relationships that he had in Congress. And we are looking forward to electing President Biden once again so that we can continue what we need to do with regards to the climate crisis. So I am very happy to be here and to answer hopefully I can answer any questions that you have.
I'm going to ask the first question. We talked about the environmental bill, the IRA. It addresses putting fossil fuel greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. We're a year and a half into it, approximately. So where are we at on that environmental goal? And where do you see it going? How are we doing?
Yeah, thank you for that question, because I think it's important for people to know that you're right, we're about a year and a half into it, and the impacts of it are really beginning. And they will be continuing in very significant ways over the next few years. But the legislation is really expected to result in about $1 trillion of investments in clean energy, and we're beginning to see that now. I think I mentioned to you that I'm doing sustainable aviation fuel. You know, we're not going to have plug-in planes anytime soon. So and aviation represents about 10% of greenhouse gases in the United States. So what are we going to do with planes to help reduce the carbon footprint? And really the only option was sustainable aviation fuel for the time being. But just that piece of legislation alone we have seen a huge increase in investments in California and in other places in the country in building, so we can build more capacity of that particular kind of cleaner fuel. The goal of the Inflation Reduction Act was to, let me back up. The goal for the United States was to get to 50% carbon reduction or greenhouse gas reduction by 2030, 100% net zero emissions by 2050. And so that 2030 goal is an important one. And we seem to be creeping up on 2030 pretty quickly here. But all of the experts who do these computer simulations and so forth, that they can put in all the component pieces of the bill to kind of see what the outcome is, they will estimate that the Inflation Reduction Act, in combination with the infrastructure bill, in combination with the CHIPS Act, kind of all together, that we should be anywhere between 34 and 42% of that 2030 goal. So 50% is where we want. One of the big pieces in the Inflation Reduction Act is a lot of money for innovation and new discoveries. And every expert from the beginning of time, once we set this net zero emissions by 2050, everyone said at that particular time, given where we are today in the country, we will not hit that. It will be impossible to hit that without new innovations that we don't really know about yet. And some of those are already starting to emerge. But that's kind of where we are. Yes, sir.
Going back to one of your closing statements and talking about marketing. Back when when Obama got the ARRA passed to get us out of the Bush crash, one of the things that the Republicans stuck in there was you're not allowed to advertise this. You can't put any logos on any of the signs. You can't put it anywhere near any of the things that we're going to build with this to take credit for that. Was similar legislation, was similar text in any of these legislations? And if not, why isn't there a standard IRA or U.S. recovery, or Joe Manchin called it this kind of sticker on every piece of that? Because this is one of the projects I think we ought to be doing as Democrats, is going into, there's a Democrat in every congressional district, in every county in the United States. And they ought to have a sticker, and they ought to go out to the project, and they ought, or a sign, and put it on the project that's getting money, so people know, this is what we did.
Yeah, and I think that's actually happening. I just don't, excuse me, I don't think we're seeing it because it's not happening around us as yet. But it will.
Okay.
You know, California, I mean, the good news is California is so far ahead that we've already been doing a lot of this. But, you know, there are hydrogen hubs going all over the country, and there's going to be, you know, California is going to be a big part of a hydrogen hub on the West Coast. We're going to see wind turbines going off of our coastline. That's going to be happening. These are wind turbines that will be out of the sight line. You won't see them as you walk along the beach. You won't see them at all, but they will be out there generating new clean energy for a country. Yes?
Hi.
Hi.
I have a technical question about the Paris Agreement that just flashed on when you were talking about when you were able to go back to another COP meeting and say, we're still in it, we're still in it.
Yeah.
I have a vague memory that one of the provisions in that is that it would take 5 years for, if the president wanted to pull out of it, that it would take 5 years for it to actually go into effect. And now I wonder if that was a foresight for a rogue president like Trump pulling out, but it would take 5 years before we actually came out, so it wouldn't happen during a one-term president. Is that in there? Do you remember?
You know, now that you're saying that, I think that that's what you're saying is accurate. I would have to go back and Google it to make sure, to validate that what I'm saying is true.
I
But
always thought it was crazy, but
Yeah.
in retrospect, it was very wise.
it was very wise, but the point, I mean, it's one thing to sign an agreement, it's another thing to start working towards your
Sure.
commitment to that agreement, and that certainly was not happening whatsoever. Yes?
Thanks for being here so happy. I had a meeting last year with the Department of Energy.
Speak up a little bit.
Sure. I had a meeting last year with the Department of Energy, and just I can't stop thinking of these bills as Bill and Ira, because I guess that's what they call them at the Department of Energy.
Yeah.
So I think of them as Bill and Ira.
Everybody, go to Washington, everybody talks
Everybody
about
says that,
Yeah.
Regarding the sort of publicizing it. I mean, that's what I told the person who I spoke to at the Department of Energy too, just like, this is amazing, why don't I know about this, I'm nerdy too. But I'm somebody who's always kind of like, I'm really involved in democratic politics world, and I feel like we need to be changing the frame a little bit. Like some of the best members of Congress I know who are really kind of like trying to utilize this for their own wins and for the big ticket wins are, you know, once a month or once a quarter putting into their social media or into their blasts, like, I brought home this much money to our district, and this is what it went to. Like Ted Lieu did that, and I forgot one of the members of Congress from.
I've been doing it.
I know, I don't actually stalk your social media that much, I gotta start. But I feel like one of the most interesting things I've heard in terms of strategy for Democrats winning this year and beyond is the idea of making the voter the champion, like the hero. So, I mean, I wonder how we might be taking some of those messages in our young millennial and Gen Z social media teams, you know, sort of framing it like the voters of District 13 were responsible for us having this.
No.
You know, I just think that might, like, because I'm somebody who's always parroting, like, Biden did this, and Biden did that, and the White House did this, but I feel like I'm even boring myself.
Yeah.
You know?
No, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
That's a very, very good point, and I think.
We just need to get people to pay attention, because I feel like the messages are out there, but people aren't paying attention.
Yeah,
Yeah.
point well taken, and I absolutely agree. But I think it's important for us to talk about what voters have provided our country, and it would have happened without voters. But we've got to tell people what has been accomplished, so that people know. And I think we need to tell them for two reasons. One is people need to understand that we're well underway in terms of doing at least the United States part as it relates to global warming. But we also have to tell people what we have accomplished so that, you know, so when we start talking about what we want to do in the next administration, that they really trust us, that this is what we wanted to do, and we did it because you voted in the right people to do it. And so we said we were going to do this, we did it, and this is what we want to do moving forward. But because you know what we have done, you can trust us that we say what we mean and we mean what we say. And I think it's important for both of those reasons.
I mean, just to your point too, I think it's really like the underlying messages we're trying to build trust, getting people having trust in government.
Yeah.
And if government, this is all the argument, government works, watch.
Yeah.
Government has worked, government will work.
Yeah.
If you continue to vote this way.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I think we should think of the rhythm of the present. We really don't know what's going to happen, or whether we can really develop plans. Even if the Democrats succeed in a major victory at the end of this year, there's very likelihood that we'll be punched by MAGA. And I'm very worried about that. That's why we have to think of the rhythm of the present. And I think there's a question that this whole act, this whole Inflation Act will really probably completely stop. I'm really worried about that. So that's why we have to think of the rhythm of the present and focus on what's happening now. Until the time comes, I'm worried about things. I'm afraid the rich will starve all of us, and the environment will simply be, the population correction will be the way, unfortunately, that the environment will be resolved. There'll be 8 billion that would change to, I hate to tell you, 1 billion or something. I'm very worried about that, but don't worry. Think of the rhythm of the present. Thanks, have a great day.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Uh-oh, Bruce has a question. He's pulling out his papers here, so
Anyway,
I might be in trouble.
As a quadruple Virgo critic, I need to get into details. So I'm concerned about the huge increase in transportation of toxic materials related to the HALEU process, high assay, low enriched uranium. Now, it's fine to bring certain industries back to America, but it is dangerous for many indigenous people and for celled organisms to bring uranium mining, milling, enrichments, and other parts of the nuclear fuel cycle home. Yet the nuclear fuel cycle is fairly straightforward compared to the incredibly complex HALEU process. I've noticed that the Defense have allotted $77 billion to promote nuclear power and fuel cycles since January 2021. Since there's controversy about the Pinyon Flats uranium mining in the Grand Canyon area in that new national monument area, yet they still have the rights to mine that uranium, do you think since so much money has been allotted to have them play with nuclear material that could at least buy that mine and another uranium mine out so to help protect groundwater and indigenous people?
I'm sorry, the question is, can we stop the uranium mining?
Seeing that so much money is allotted to the nuclear industry
Yeah.
since COVID, oddly, or maybe not oddly, seems like you get a little chunk of that and do something good with it by not letting them
Well,
mine more uranium in that.
I didn't mention this, but there is money in the Inflation Reduction Act for nuclear energy, which, I'm not in support of, but, sometimes you have to make some compromises. I think that the type of nuclear fission that requires uranium needs to stop in our country. There are some new innovations around nuclear energy that are smaller component pieces that are much smaller. I think everybody had that in mind in terms of if the country moves forward, that would be one option. But I think that I'm very optimistic around nuclear fusion, which is not fission that requires uranium and has radioactive waste, but fusion that is, and don't ask me to give you a scientific explanation here, but fusion is really, you have to, it's about atoms and all of that, but you have to get the temperatures at 10 or 20 or 1,000 times hotter than the sun. This has happened in Lawrence Livermore Lab. They have created energy for a minute or two through this process. But it's energy that really is almost endless in terms of the energy supply once we can finalize this and bring it to market. And a lot of scientists will say we're 10 years away, and we might be 10 years away. Some will even say we might be 20 years away. But it is a very clean process it's fusion and not fission, which fission is what we all know about and what we all are afraid about. This process is, as I said, it has had success in Lawrence Livermore Lab. It's had success in a couple of other laboratories in Europe. And as we pursue this, we will never, ever, ever have the need to mine uranium anywhere or other important minerals. So it would.
Seems like all the funds would go to the same people who've been doing all the destructive things with nuclear since World War II era. Even though I obviously didn't think we got it before Hitler, but other than that,
Well, I
it's been a
think
disastrous industry.
going back to the point that Susan made in terms of the voters, I think, in terms of advancing nuclear energy as we know it today, it is the voters who are not going to let that happen. And so I don't really worry that we are going to have some great expansion or be like France that's 100% dependent on nuclear energy. I just don't have that fear at all. We've got to figure out what to do with the nuclear waste that we have in this country. And we haven't figured that one out yet, but I think as we move towards the future, we're moving further and further and further away as we build and develop and expand all of these renewable energies that we have currently. And then I think if we're looking 10, 20 years down the line, I think this research around fusion is very, very, very promising.
Right.
All right, next question.
I don't want to be the picker.
Next question.
Everybody keeps talking about addressing the things that Biden has done, but how do you deal with those issues when the people's questions that you're hearing are the prices at the grocery store and the cost of gasoline?
Yeah.
unfortunately, I have to say, I don't think where Biden's policies are helping people in those areas.
I agree, and I think, I think he's, in his last State of the Union, I think he tried to address some things that he is doing through executive order to address that, but you're right, I mean, this issue, and I think Democrats, we have to lean in on the fact that inflation is here, it's real. I mean, we go here in California and, gas is $5.50 and, in the Midwest, people are freaking out that their gas is costing them $3, so it's real. We've got to address it. I think, the economy is very good for a lot of people, not very good for just the average, hardworking American family. And I think the Inflation Reduction Act, while it's a weird name, I do think that there are component pieces in that are really going to draw down pricing for the American people. It's not going to happen tomorrow or the next day, but in the longer run, a year or two, and hopefully it's before the election, but I think some of the impacts from the Inflation Reduction Act in terms of bringing, right now electricity is not cheaper than it should be, but electricity from renewable energy is much cheaper than it is from any other source. It's just that all of the utility companies and so forth have not, gotten up to speed and don't have a broad enough portfolio of renewable energies, and that's exactly what the Inflation Reduction Act certainly wants to address. But I think you're right, we have to bend into that and we have to come up with solutions for that. I mean, I think that drug prices will come down over time because Medicare can negotiate those prices. I think the cost of automobiles and EV automobiles are eventually going to come down. They're starting to come
That
down.
doesn't affect the grocery stores where most people have the problem.
Right.
Okay, we're going to take two more questions. Jane is here, and then one more, and then we're on to questions.
Great. Thank you so much for coming today, Congresswoman Jane Wishon. Hi. So I know that there is legislation at the state level about the wind turbines. And we all talk about wind energy, but the reality is that there is not a deep water port on the West Coast that is capable of handling the turbines that we would need to put offshore. And I just wondered what kind of communication is going back and forth, or is there discussion between the federal government and the state government so that we can make this happen?
Yes. And the state of California and the federal government too are trying to streamline some of the processes so that it doesn't take 20 years to go through CEQA and NEPA and all of that necessary to kind of get through that. So my district, we have a deep water port in my district, the Port of Hueneme. It's obviously a smaller port and can't handle what you just described. But we're really fighting for the ability for the Port of Hueneme to be the port that has all of the supplies that is, once it's all built, just like you have to go out to the rigs and do maintenance or whatever, the same thing is going to have to happen for wind turbines, that the Port of Hueneme would be sort of the genesis of where that would happen. And the Naval Base Ventura County is right there, so there's some open space that we have to work with the military to kind of figure that out, but we can stage a lot of stuff and have a lot of ships or boats or whatever they're going to be that are going to go out and do that. But I think it's going to have to end up being, LA Long Beach is where that's going to actually have to happen. Those are very, very busy ports, but when there's a will, there's a way, and California is, there is a huge amount of resources and money there to make this happen. Yeah.
Hi, Dave Gutman. First, on the blizzard. talking to a local newscaster about a month ago, and he says, when we put a story on, even if Biden comes out and opens it, there's like hundreds of clicks, where for the traffic that Biden created, there's thousands of clicks. So I think as our duty is to somehow publicize that, create a hashtag, make it go viral, so anytime there is a story about the Inflation Reduction Act, and something that we say, thank you President Biden, Inflation Reduction Act, or something like that. So we get that word out and hopefully we get some things trending. My question is more on the oil depletion allowance. And is there anything we can do to stop rewarding oil companies for that tax break that they're getting, or is that just politically?
In Biden's second administration. But that was Joe Manchin. So, but, you know, we have to win. I mean, everybody knows there's so much at stake in this election. Climate being one of them, our democracy another, our liberties another. I mean, it's huge. We're, you know, this is it. This election, we have to win. Failure is certainly not an option. But there is so much that we can do if we have the majorities in the House and the Senate. Even with the Senate just having the 50 senators and, you know, having to use a reconciliation process once again, but there's a lot more that can be done.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have a question?
If Mark will indulge me.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to bring the attention of the audience to the significant environmental justice component of the Inflation Reduction. If you could just briefly mention the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and then the significant allocation of 40% of the IRA funds to marginalized communities. I think that would be important.
Yeah, it's a huge piece, as you said, of the IRA, and it was a non-negotiable piece within it. And I think I even saw this morning on the news. I think they said 40% of Californians are exposed to, you know, dirty air and so forth. I mean, and they talked about Los Angeles and Oakland and Bakersfield, and, you know, we're not just talking about little communities that are close to brownfields and the like. I mean, it's much more serious than that. And so I think it's critically important. I think it's one of the things that is happening right now. It's, you know, off the blocks. It's happening. There are other things in the IRA that aren't happening, but that piece of it is actually happening. And I think at the end of the day, you know, people say that this investment that we're making in IRA would yield about $5 trillion worth of benefits down the road, and a lot of that comes from health and the fact of so much having have to be spent on keeping people healthy. So it's a huge component piece. You might be able to add more to it than I, but it's a really critical piece of the legislation. And I think it's already starting to build some of these kind of frontline communities and so forth that, you know, bringing, you know, clean opportunities, bringing more jobs, but most importantly, cleaning up the environment of which they live in.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia. Thanks everybody for your questions. It's been a good session. A couple things that Julia talked about. We got into nuclear fusion. I didn't know we were going to go there.
Are you not a fan?
I am a huge fan.
I am a huge fan. I'm on the fusion caucus back in Washington, so I like to talk about it almost everywhere I go.
Right. It was a reminder to me of why we formed the Environment and Clean Energy Act, because I'm a total nerd, science nerd. I love exploring these new technologies, and we do talk about this a lot in our committee meetings. I'm really glad you had an opportunity.
So maybe you can explain to them better than I can. I just know that it can happen. And it will, and we don't need any other energy source once we have it.
I'm not going to talk about that. Other than to say,
It's clean and
nuclear.
there's no waste from it, there's no byproduct from it, it's like, it's awesome.
It's been around the corner now for the last 20 years. Maybe in the last 30 years. It hasn't happened yet on a commercial basis, so we're still waiting. But yeah,
Well, even
you're right.
the environmental thing is whether you really got more than you put in is really a high thing.
Correct.
So
That's where
we
we're at.
haven't proved it scientifically, let alone in itself.
We talked a little bit about the next election. One of the questions that I didn't get to ask is, what happens if we don't win? How critical is this election to our survival as a species?
I mean, I think we all know what the answer to that is that, you know, all of this, there will be great intention by the Trump administration, if he wins this election, to really reverse all of this. And you'll see more tax breaks for the wealthy, you'll see more drill baby drill, you will see a complete non-interest in the environment. But you know, at the end of the day, I think honestly, it's going to be hard for them to undo what has been accomplished. Just like, you know, the ACA. When the ACA passed, it was, we lost, I don't know, Karina, how many seats did we lose in the House? It was like 35, 60 seats in the House. And that was, you know, every Republican was running on, we're getting rid of the ACA, we're getting rid of the ACA. And they never came up with an alternative. And then, you know, a year or two goes by and suddenly the American people are like, no, this is a really good thing. And we really need it. And I think it was hard for them to undo. And I think the same thing is really happening around sort of this climate issue too, is that people are really beginning to get it. You know, in my district we're a largely agricultural district, and every single farmer in Ventura County are Republicans. And I go out and talk to these farmers, and they're really beginning to completely get it. Ventura County is warming faster than any other county in California, if you can believe that. And you know, the reason why we are so largely agricultural is because we have a Mediterranean climate and farmers can grow all year round. There's not a growing season. They can grow you know, all year round. That Mediterranean climate goes away, and you know, half of the yield from the farming community out of Ventura County gets cut in half as well. So, and obviously water, we can talk about water for the next 3 hours, but you know, water is another huge issue. But my point being is that Republican farmers in Ventura County see what is going on and are really getting it. So, and I think, you know, I always tell people when you come to Ventura County, you know, when you land at LAX for all my members of Congress, you know, they'll say, so where exactly is your district? And, you know, and I'll say, well, you know, if you come to LA, you'll land at LAX and you'll drive up the 405, which is, you know, 14 lanes of traffic, and then you're going to hit the 101. This is the busiest intersection in California. And then you're going to head west or north on the 101, and you're going to go through the San Fernando Valley, and it's going to be all busy and stores and billboards and signage everywhere, and then suddenly you're going to hit this place where it's like all of that goes away and it's just rolling hills and open space. And I think the Republicans in Ventura County, which believe me, there are plenty of them, are really, you know, really believe in all this stuff too as it relates to climate. So it's happening, it's changing.
Thank you.
Thank you
We
so much.
we could go on and
Yeah.
on. I
But
mean,
we
I'm
can't.
so enjoying this conversation.